I know one eyebrow. I don't like standing like this or that's it. I really, I don't know. I mean, it's nothing to say this side. It's we have to be I'm not wrong. Also to move closer and see. And Jimmy has already done it and ignored us. Oh, let's go. Yeah. Almost today. After the cover notices we feel all the hearing and so I'll try and keep them brief. First of all, please silence your phones or turn them off. And if you're filling out an evaluation form, please remember to put the name of the course and the name of the lecturer, otherwise it doesn't get recycled. If you've lost anything, we have a lost property box up in the front office. And we've got a spectacles, we've got sunglasses, we've got a cardigan, we've got a sun hat, we've got a handkerchief, and more to be about. So if you've lost anything, that's where you go. Okay, and you'll notice boxes dotted about the place asking you to donate books to children. They're all going to be donated to the Malaya level schools, primary schools, and you can either bring them from home, if you want to buy children's books from the charity bookshops, or even exclusive books and donate them. The two NPOs today, they'll probably have gone by the time this lecture finishes, so very briefly. One of them is a gun to free South Africa, which I think is something that we've all aspired and hoped for. And the other one is Home from Home, which supports about 200 orphans in foster homes throughout the Western Cape, and they're selling the children's artwork outside. Okay, finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce our lecturer performers, Gillian Wygrass and Dr. Rowan Quince, and they co-founded Writers Bear Witness in 2019, and they're going to tell you a bit about that just before they start. So, ladies first. Gillian Wygrass qualified at UCT, and she taught English literature and theory of knowledge for the International Baccalaureate, and she's taught in Ethiopia, Portugal, and Switzerland. And she's also taught in state schools in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and the UK. And her writing includes the play, Shimarenga Children, and an educational children's story to raise awareness about malaria. And that's called Ozzy, Dozy, Mozzie, and it's for sale at exclusive books outside. And Dr. Quince, who has a PhD from the Southern Illinois University. He taught English at Georgia Southern University, and since 1994 he's taught at schools in Johannesburg. He published a book called Shakespeare in South Africa in 2000 that unfortunately is not on sale here, but I'm sure exclusives could order copies if you'd like it. His shows at the National Arts Festival include World War I, Remembered, and What the Dickens. He runs the Shakespeare Club at the National Children's Theatre in Johannesburg. So, over to the two of you.
Barbara's asked us to say a little bit about Writers Bear Witness. So actually, as you heard, Rowan and another friend here in South Africa presented at the Grahamstown Festival on World War One and the poets of World War One. And he suggested to me, I live in France at the moment, and I've worked in the last few years, I was working in Switzerland, and suggested to me that he brought it over and we did it. And this was 2019, and I felt after 2018, people had had enough of 2018. Now they didn't want to hear any more about the World War One just at the moment. So we came up with the idea of Between the Wars, starting with the story immediately after World War One and taking it on. So what we do in Right to Bear Witness is we give an overview of the historical events of the period, and then we perform excerpts by writers, mostly literary writers, but not exclusively, so popular writers, and you'll hear. So a range of different kinds of voices who commented and responded to the events of their time. This is slightly, I suppose, in argument, in discussion, if you like, with the kind of education that we had at the time when I was at UCT and so on, which argued really that literature had to be universal, that it wasn't grounded in specific events and so on. But clearly, in fact, if you look at the writing of most writers, sometimes they definitely are. And so we hope you'll agree and you will enjoy our performance lecture. Thank you. Between the Wars, 1919 to 1939 revisited.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark the place.
And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, unheard amid the guns below.
We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
By Canadian poet John McCrae. The armistice at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918 brought the First World War to an end.
Only 20 years later, the Second World War began. How did the world get it so spectacularly wrong?
Most historians blame the Treaty of Versailles. It was so unfairly harsh towards Germany that it created a strong sense of victimhood and desire for revenge.
Adolf Hitler found eager listeners to his message, "Make Germany great again."
Should we rather blame the rise of nationalism and racism throughout the world?
Men and women returning from the war were disillusioned at their treatment by those who had never fought.
Vera Brittain, who served as a nurse on the Western Front, wrote The Lament of the Demobilized.
4 years!
Some say consolingly.
Oh, well, what's that? You're young, and then it must have been a very fine experience for you.
And they forget how others stay behind and just got on the better since we were aware.
You threw 4 years into the melting pot, did you indeed?
These others cry.
Oh, well, and the war fooled you.
And we're beginning to agree with them.
T.S. Eliot, in his modernist poem of 1922, The Waste Land, eavesdrops on a conversation in a London pub.
Two women discuss their husbands coming home from the war and wanting sex.
The barman tries to close up for the night.
When Lil's husband got him mobbed, I didn't mince my words. I said to her myself,
Hurry up, please, it's time.
now Albert's coming home, make yourself a bit smart. He's going to want to know what you did with the money he gave you to buy yourself some teeth. He did. I was there. You have them all out, Lil, and get yourself a nice set, he said. I swear I can't bear to look at you. I know more, can't I said. Think of poor Albert. He's been in the army 4 years. He wants a good time. And if you won't give it him, there's others will, I said. Oh, is there? She said. Something of that, I said. Well, then, I'll know you to thank, she said, and give me a straight look.
Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time.
Good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Good night, Sarah. Good night, good night.
Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night. Good night.
Virginia Woolf shows the enduring psychological trauma in Mrs. Dalloway. Shell-shocked Septimus Smith hallucinates in the park.
Leaves are alive. Trees are alive. The leaves being connected by millions of fibers with my own body.
Committed to a lunatic asylum, he leaps to his death from a window.
Impaling himself on the railings below. Mrs. Dalloway relives it.
He had thrown himself from the window. Up had flashed the ground, through him, blundering, bruising went the rusty spikes. There he lay with a thud, thud, thud in his brain, and then a suffocation of blackness. So she saw it.
The peace talks began in Paris in January 1919.
US President Woodrow Wilson argued for a League of Nations to prevent future wars.
France and Britain were unforgiving. France had lost 1.3 million soldiers and 400,000 civilians.
The British were determined to squeeze Germany till the pips squeak.
Germany was excluded from the talks.
Representatives of subject peoples flocked to Paris.
Korea seeking independence from Japan.
Ho Chi Minh hoped for greater rights for Vietnam.
Gandhi organized his first all-India protest against British rule of India.
At a dinner party in England, Winston Churchill said,
Gandhi ought to be bound hand and foot at the gates of Delhi and then trampled on by an enormous elephant.
Emir Faisal of the Hijaz, now Saudi Arabia, was the only Middle Eastern representative permitted.
2 Zionist representatives attended and put their case to the conference for a Jewish state in Palestine.
President Wilson demurred. He insisted that the United States adhered strictly to the principle of the consent of the government. An American commission was sent to sound out the views of the people on the ground in Palestine.
The commission reported. If that principle is to rule, it should be remembered that the entire Palestinian population, 90% of the whole, is emphatically against the entire Zionist program. No British officer consulted believed that the Zionist project could be carried out except by force of arms. Decisions requiring armies to be carried out are not surely likely to be taken in the interests of a serious injustice. For the initial claim, often submitted by Zionists, that they have a right to Palestine based on an occupation 2,000 years ago can hardly be seriously considered.
But Balfour replied, "We British do not intend to consult the current inhabitants of that country. We are committed to Zionism, and Zionism, be it good or bad, is rooted in ancient tradition. Present needs and future hopes of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 or so Arabs who currently occupy that ancient land."
In the end, 3 articles of the British Mandate stipulated the opening up of Palestine to Jewish immigration with a view to the creation of a Jewish state there.
Despite many critical voices and a vote against it in the House of Lords, the mandate was awarded, though it violated Article 22 of the new League of Nations.
Most were doomed to disappointment.
And Germany was forced to accept responsibility for all the loss and damage caused by the war.
The South African delegate, Jan Smuts, condemned the treaty. Are we in our sober senses or suffering from shell shock? The promises of a new international order and a fairer, better world are not written in this treaty.
The Germans had no choice. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on the 28th of June, 1919. T.E. Lawrence, aka Lawrence of Arabia, who had led the Arab uprising against the Turks with the promise of independence if British won the war, wrote in his memoir of war, 7 Pillars of Wisdom.
When we achieved and the new world dawned, the old men came out again and took from us our victory and remade it to the likeness of the world they knew. We stammered that we had worked for a new heaven and a new earth, and they thanked us kindly and made their peace.
For those who still hope for a fairer, better world, the League of Nations, with its headquarters in Geneva, was a beacon in the darkness.
In 1922, however, Benito Mussolini became Prime Minister of Italy, the National Fascist Party, and soon proved a test for the League of Nations. When in 1923 an Italian general was murdered in Corfu, Mussolini bombarded Corfu from the air and sea, killing 16 people, most of them children, then invaded the island.
When Greece appealed to the League of Nations, Italy threatened to leave the organisation.
The League caved in to Italy's demands. Greece had to pay 50 million lira in damages.
Spirit Britain commented, the League failed its first major test, showing its weakness and inability to settle disputes when a great power confronts a small one.
Duff Cooper was part of the British delegation attending the General Assembly of the League.
He was assigned to a committee dealing with the evils of alcohol.
At our first meeting, all the delegates to the effects of alcohol as we sipped our port.
The chairman, a Frenchman, explained that wine, of course, was not alcohol.
His views were warmly supported by the representatives of Italy, Spain, and Portugal. I then felt bound to remind the meeting that many doctors recommended whiskey in preference to wine. I was confident that this agreeable beverage would not come within the purview of our inquiries.
The committee achieved absolutely nothing.
Germany got the vote in 1919, propelling the Social Democrats to victory in the general election and establishing the Weimar Republic.
But by 1923, Germany, crippled by war debt and reparations, faced hyperinflation.
The mark fell to 800 million to the pound, a wheelbarrow of banknotes or one loaf of bread.
People had no food. Frail children were dying of malnutrition.
In 1921, Adolf Hitler became leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They had a plan to seize power and to defy the Treaty of Versailles.
But they were arrested and imprisoned.
On a trip to Germany in 1924, Vera Britain found bitter rage and a desire for revenge, especially against the French.
A young German officer expressed hatred of the French.
One day we will make war on them and treat them as they have treated us. I am longing for that war.
In 1925, however, the Locarno treaties normalized relations with Germany. Germany joined the League of Nations. By the mid-1920s, the economies of Europe had improved. Across the Atlantic, the American economy boomed.
Americans were celebrating the roaring 20s.
The 19th Amendment gave United States women the vote.
Bobbed hair and short skirts became fashionable.
Zelda Fitzgerald was the original flapper. She and Scott were very fashionable and they partied hard.
Alcohol consumption increased despite prohibition.
Sophisticated people smoked cigarettes.
Faithfulness in marriage was optional.
The Great Gatsby is organised around drunken parties.
How do you feel, Miss Baedeker?
Ah,
Massive and lethargic woman spoke in Miss Baedeker's defence. Oh, she's all right now. When she's had 5 or 6 cocktails, she always starts screaming like that. I tell her she ought to leave it alone.
I do leave it alone.
I heard you yelling, so I said to Doc Simmett here, there's someone that needs your help, Doc. But you got her head all wet when you stuck her head in the pool.
I had more than my head stuck in a pool. They almost drowned me that time over you, Joycey.
Countered Dr. Simmett. Then you ought to leave it alone.
Speak for yourself. Your handshakes. How dare you operate on me?
1920s jokes played on the modern woman's new assertiveness. Do you mind if I smoke?
I don't like to burst into flames.
You look sporty. What do you play?
Then,
As Cole Porter wrote, birds do it.
please do it.
Even educated fleas do it.
Let's do it. Let's fall in love.
In 1921, Margaret Sanger established the American Birth Control League to empower women to decide whether and when to have babies.
The Roman Catholic Archbishop of New York said that contraception was worse than abortion.
To take life after its inception is a horrible crime, but to prevent life that the Creator is about to bring into being is satanic.
But the idea of birth control for all women took hold. In Britain, Mary Stopes opened the first birth control clinic in Holloway, a poor working class area of London.
Playground line, wait.
Jeannie, Jeannie, full of hopes, read a book by Mary Stopes, but now to judge by her condition, she must have read the wrong edition.
Characters in mind clearly did read the right edition. When with the will comes and evening is nigh, we'll be happy in my blue heaven. Just Molly and me.
And baby makes 3.
We're happy in my blue heaven. Writers did not have the freedom they have today. The New York Society, the suppression of vice, brought charges of obscenity against the novel Ulysses by James Joyce. Molly Bloom is first cynical about men.
What a man looks like with his 2 bags full and that other thing sticking up at you like a hat rack. No wonder they cover it with a cabbage leaf.
But then she remembers the day he proposed to her.
The day we were lying among the rhododendrons, the day I got him to propose to me. Yes, I gave him the bit of seed cake out of my mouth. My God, after that long kiss, I near lost my breath. Yes, he said I was a flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are flowers all, a woman's body. Yes, that was why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is, and I gave him all the pleasure I could.
The judge decided it was not pornographic. In respect of the theme of sex in the minds of Joyce's characters, it must be remembered that his locale was Celtic, and the season, spring.
E.H. Lawrence published Lady Chatterley's Lover in France in 1929. The French loved it, but the English-speaking world banned it. British censors were particularly offended that the obscenities were addressed to the aristocratic Lady Chatterley by her gamekeeper in a rural Nottinghamshire dialect.
I love thee when thou lies there. A woman's a lovely thing when her's deep to fuck and cunts good. I love thee, thy legs, the shape on thee, and the womanness on thee. I love the womanness on thee.
In the United States, the Mormon Senator Reed Smoot threatened to read passages from it aloud in the Senate. He said,
Most damnable! It is written by a man with a diseased mind and a soul so black that he would obscure even the darkness of hell.
in New York, a group of black writers formed the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes wrote her manifesto.
The younger Negro artists intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. We build our temples of tomorrow. We stand on top of the mountain, free within ourselves.
In his sonnet, From the Dark Tower, County Cullen wrote,
We shall not always plant while others reap the golden increment of bursting fruit.
not always countenance abject and mute, that lesser men should hold their brothers cheap.
Not everlastingly while others sleep shall we beguile their limbs with mellow flute, not always bend to some more subtle brute.
We were not made eternally to weep.
The night whose sable breast relieves the star-white stars is no less lovely for being dark.
And there are buds that cannot bloom at all in light, but crumple, piteous, and fall.
So in the dark we hide the heart that bleeds.
And wait, and tend our agonizing seeds.
The underlying prejudices of jazz age are satirized in The Great Gatsby.
America's obsession with racial purity is expressed by Tom Buchanan.
Civilization's gone to pieces. Have you read The Rise of a Colored Empire by this man Goddard?
No.
Well, it's a fine book and everybody ought to read it. The idea is that if we don't look up, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific stuff. It's been proved.
Tom's getting very profound, said Daisy with an expression of unthoughtful sadness. He reads deep books with long words in them. What was that word?
Well, it's a fine book and everybody ought to. It's up to us who are the dominant race to watch out, or these other races will have control of things.
Gotta beat them down.
The idea is that we are Nordics. I am, and you are, and
After an infinitesimal hesitation, he included Daisy with a slight nod. She winked at me again.
we've produced all the things that are going to make civilization. Oh, science and art and all that. Do you see?
As for Tom, I was surprised that he had been depressed by a book. Something was making him nibble at the edge of stale ideas.
The book Fitzgerald alludes to is The Passing of a Great Race, published by Madison Grant in 1915. White America, Grant argued, was committing race suicide, letting in genetically inferior immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe.
He advocated eugenics, selective breeding to eradicate undesirable types from the white race,
Beginning with the criminal, the diseased, and the insane,
and extending to weaklings,
and perhaps ultimately to worthless race types.
removing certain people's right to bear children would improve the white race.
In 1927, coercive sterilization of women classed as morons became law. In the ensuing years, 62,000 women were forcibly sterilized in the United States.
Grant's book was read in Europe too. In 1928, Switzerland became the first country in Europe to pass a coercive sterilization law.
In Sweden, 60,000 women were sterilized. And in Britain, Marie Stopes said,
Birth control is a racial matter, and mixed race children should be sterilized at birth.
when Grant's book was translated into German, Hitler read it. He was thrilled. In a letter to Grant, he called it my Bible.
In Berlin, meanwhile, they were celebrating the Golden 20s. American correspondent William Shirer wrote in his Berlin diary,
Berlin of the Republic, the carefree, emancipated, civilized air, the snub-nosed young women with short bobbed hair, and the young men with either cropped or long hair, it made no difference, who sat up all night with you and discussed anything with intelligence and passion.
gay people enjoyed new freedoms.
Gender-fluid Swiss writer Anne-Marie Schwarzenbach made her home in Berlin, where she lived dangerously, drank too much, and never went to sleep before dawn.
And in 1929, Erich Maria Remarque published the great World War I novel, All Quiet on the Western Front. It highlighted the pointless suffering and the loss of young lives caused by the war.
It sold 2.5 million copies in 22 languages in its first 18 months of publication.
Paris was the centre of modern art and literature. James Joyce, George Orwell, and the Scott Fitzgerald all wrote there.
And they danced the night away.
New dances, the rumba, the bikini, the shimmy.
The Charleston swept Paris when African-American singer Josephine Baker burst onto the scene.
And Coco Chanel pioneered the little black dress.
Austrian philosopher Rudolf Steiner, the Italian Maria Montessori, and the American Melville Dewey developed new progressive systems of education.
In Britain, compulsory schooling for all children aged 5 to 14 was made law.
Even war poked fun at the poor educational standards at the time in his 1928 novel, Decline and Fall.
Paul Pennyfeather applies at an agency for a teaching post at a minor private school.
Junior assistant master to teach classics and English with subsidiary mathematics, German and French. Experience essential, first class games essential. It might have been made for you.
But I don't know a word of German. I've had no experience and I can't play cricket.
It doesn't do to be too modest. It's wonderful what one can teach when one tries.
When he arrives, Paul is shown to his first class.
That's your little mob in there. You let them out at 11.
What am I to teach them?
I shouldn't like to teach them anything, not just yet anyway. Just keep them quiet.
Paul achieves order in the classroom with the following instruction. You will all write an essay on self-indulgence. There will be a prize of 2 shillings for the longest essay, irrespective of merit.
So the 1920s showed some improvements in human rights, more education for children, advances for women, African Americans, even a thriving gay culture in Paris and Berlin.
But everything changed in 1939.
In 1929, the Wall Street crash ended the decade, ushering in the Great Depression. Starting in the United States, the Depression quickly affected Europe and the rest of the world.
In The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck tells of evicted tenant farmers who left the Dust Bowls of Kansas and Oklahoma to find work in California.
He describes how food was destroyed to keep up prices.
Carloads of oranges dumped on the ground, and men with hoses squirt kerosene on the oranges, and the smell of rot fills the country.
Dump potatoes in the rivers, place guards along the banks to keep the hungry people from fishing them out.
Slaughter the pigs and bury them, and let the putrescence drip down into the earth.
And coroners filling the certificates died of malnutrition because the food must be forced to rot.
The people come with nets to fish for the potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back.
They come in rattling cars to get the dumped oranges, but the kerosene is sprayed.
And they stand still and watch the potatoes float by.
Listen to the screaming pigs being killed in the ditch and covered with quicklime.
Watch the mountains of oranges slop down to putrefying ooze.
In the eyes of the people, there is the failure.
And in the eyes of the hungry, there is a growing wrath.
And in the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling, growing heavy.
People were reduced to begging in the streets, dropped by their former friends.
Popular singer Bing Crosby spoke to the desperate in his song.
Once I built a railroad, I made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
Why don't you remember? They called me Al. It was Al all the time. Hey, don't you remember? I'm your pal. Brother, can you spare a dime?
President Roosevelt introduced the New Deal to provide jobs and welfare for the poor.
His outraged opponents joked.
Government, you have 2 cows.
Socialism. You keep one cow's milk and the government takes the other and gives out its milk.
Communism, the government takes both cows and gives the milk away as it sees fit.
New Deal. You get rid of both your cows and milk the government.
But the New Deal saved millions of Americans from total destitution.
European authoritarian regimes tightened their grip in the 1930s. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's disastrous 5-year plans resulted in famine.
To eradicate accused enemies of the working class, he instituted the Great Purge.
More than 750,000 people were executed. The terror was immortalized in Anna Akhmatova's poetry.
Terror fingers all things in the dark, leads moonlight to the axe. There's an ominous knock in the wall, a ghost, a thief, a rat.
When her son, Lev, was arrested, she wrote,
Madness with its wings has covered half my soul. It feeds me fiery wine and lures me into the abyss.
In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Joseph Goebbels became his Minister of Propaganda and Enlightenment.
The Nazis rapidly organized public book burnings of works which opposed their ideas. These took place in public squares and on university campuses.
The works of Jewish authors were among the first to be burned.
Jewish Austrian writer Joseph Roth commented,
Many of us served in the war. Many died. We have written for Germany. We have died for Germany. We have sung Germany, the real Germany. That is why today we are being burned by Germany.
All Quiet on the Western Front was also incinerated for dishonouring the German war effort.
They also burned Light in My Darkness by Helen Keller, purely because she was blind and deaf.
Poet and playwright Bertolt Brecht wrote, "The burning of the books."
When the regime ordered that books with dangerous teaching should be publicly burned, and everywhere oxen were forced to draw carts full of books to the funeral pyre, an exiled poet, one of the best, discovered with fury when he studied the list of the burned that his books had been forgotten. He rushed to his writing table on wings of anger and wrote a letter to those in power.
Burn me!
He wrote with hurrying pen.
Burn me! Do not treat me in this fashion. Do not leave me out. Have I not always spoken the truth in my books? And now you treat me like a liar. I order you. Burn me!
Shakespeare's Coriolanus was banned.
And then unbanned. And then it became a primer for the Nazis, who claimed that it showed
The true hero and Führer Coriolanus, who desires to lead the misguided folk to glory.
Brecht's play, Fear and Misery in the Third Reich, shows the effects of growing totalitarianism on people's lives.
As all teenagers had to join the Hitler Youth, parents started to be scared of their own kids, who were told to report disloyal behavior by their parents.
Where is it anyway?
How do I know?
Sorry, carry on. Stop Heinrich! But it's out.
I'm not shooting me out.
Boring.
Why are you so nervous if the boy goes out once in a while?
What have you been saying?
What's that got to do with it?
Well, you're so uncontrolled these days.
I'm not. But even if I were, what's that got to do with the boy being out?
Oh, you know, they listen.
So what?
So what? What if he tells tales? You know what's drummed into them in the Hitler Youth. They're under orders to report everything. Strange that he went on so quiet.
Brecht fled Germany, and the play was produced in Paris.
W.H. Auden, in his poem Epitaph on a Tyrant, painted the character of the totalitarian dictator.
Perfection of a kind was what he was after.
And the poetry invented was very easy to understand
He knew human folly like the back of his hand.
and was greatly interested in armies and flutes.
When he laughed, respectable senators burst with laughter.
And when he cried, little children died in the streets.
In 1935, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia.
Emperor Haile Selassie ordered a general mobilization.
All men and boys able to carry a spear go to Addis Ababa.
Every married man will bring his wife to cook and wash for him.
Every unmarried man will bring any unmarried woman he can find to cook and wash for him.
Anyone found at home after receiving this order will be hanged.
The Ethiopian army was no match for Mussolini's bombs and poison gas.
Haile Selassie was driven into exile in Britain. Addressing the League of Nations, he said,
The problem is not merely a question of Italian aggression. It is the very existence of the League of Nations. It is the confidence that each state is to place in international treaties. It is the value of promises made to small states that their integrity and their independence shall be respected and ensured. In a word, it is international morality that is at stake.
the League of Nations applied some sanctions, but the British and the French said,
It's not worth going to war with Italy over Ethiopia.
once again, the League of Nations proved ineffectual.
Mussolini moved closer to an alliance with Hitler.
In 1936, in Spain, an attempted army coup was led by General Franco against the left-wing Republican government. They were backed by Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany. An uprising against the coup by the workers led to civil war.
Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca captured the violence of the time. In his collection, Gypsy Ballads, he describes the massacre of gypsies in Andalusia by the right-wing civil guard.
Along the streets of shadow, old gypsy women ran.
Through the steep streets, sinister cloaks climbed, leaving behind them whirlwinds of scissors.
Stubborn rifles cracked, sounding in the night.
But the civil guard advanced, sowing flames.
Rosa of the Camborias moans in her doorway, her 2 severed breasts lying on a tray.
O city of the gypsies, the civil guard depart through a tunnel of silence while flames surround you.
Lorca was arrested on the 16th of August 1936 and executed by firing squad 3 days later. His body was never found.
To support Franco, the German Luftwaffe bombed and destroyed the Basque town of Guernica.
A month later, the Italian Air Force bombed the neighboring town of Durango.
The Republicans received some aid from the Soviet Union and Mexico.
The British declared neutrality, but suspended exports to the Republican government. The French likewise crossed their arms.
So thousands of idealists joined the International Brigade.
George Orwell, in Homage to Catalonia, describes the sounds of dawn on the battlefield.
I am walking up and down the line of sentries under the dark boughs of the poplars. As the yellow dawn comes up behind us, the Andalusian sentry, muffled in his cloak, begins singing. Across no man's land, 100 or 200 yards away, you can hear the fascist sentry also singing.
By 1939, Franco was victorious. French writer Albert Camus commented, "It was in Spain that my generation learned that one may be right and yet be beaten, that force can vanquish spirit, that there are times when courage is not its own recompense. It is this, doubtless, which explains why so many the world over feel the Spanish drama as a personal tragedy."
Across the world, in Japan, army officers assassinated the prime minister, gradually establishing rule by right-wing nationalists and the military.
In 1931, Japan invaded the Chinese province of Manchuria to get its raw materials.
The League of Nations criticized Japan.
So it left the League.
The 7th of July 1937 saw the outbreak of war in China against an expanded Japanese occupation.
And one of its features was the mass rape of Chinese women by Japanese troops in the towns captured, especially Nanjing, which resulted in the deaths of more than 300,000 people.
Christopher Isherwood and W.H. Auden went to China in 1938 to report.
In their book, Journey to a War, Isherwood describes the aftermath of a bombing raid by Japanese planes.
Over by the gate lay 5 civilian victims on stretchers, waiting for their coffins to arrive. They were terribly mutilated and very dirty, for the force of the explosion had tattooed their flesh with gravel and sand. Beside one corpse, the brand new undamaged straw hat.
All the bodies looked very dead. But as we stood beside one old woman whose brains were soaking obscenely through a towel, I saw the blood-caked mouth open and shut, and the hand clench and unclench.
In the International Enclave of Shanghai, a dinner is arranged with 4 Japanese civilians.
Auden and Isherwood promised not to mention the war, but the Japanese guests provoked them.
You've been traveling in China. How interesting. I hope you've had no inconvenience.
Only from your aeroplane.
But surely you must have found the living conditions very primitive, very inefficient.
Oh, on the contrary, extremely efficient. Politeness and kindness everywhere.
Oh, yes, the Chinese are certainly charming. What a pity. This war could have been so easily avoided. Our demands were very reasonable. We really love the Chinese. That is the nice thing about this war. There is no bitterness. We in Japan feel absolutely no bitterness against the Chinese.
Why should you? Have you had your towns burnt and your women raped? Have you ever been bombed?
That is certainly a most interesting point of view.
Fascists of different nations loved uniforms, especially coloured shirts.
Hitler's stormtroopers, the SA, were called the brown shirts.
American fascists call themselves the silver shirts.
Irish fascists were the blue
In
shirts.
South Africa, the grey shirts.
A popular ditty at the time went,
David Lehrer with his blue shirts and his back against the wall.
Mussolini with his black shirts and riding for a fall.
Hitler with his brown shirts, lording it over all.
Hurrah,
Gandhi with no shirt at all. English fascists were also the black shirts.
In The Code of the Worcesters, English author P.G. Woodhouse satirises the leader of the British fascists, Oswald Mosley, in the character of Roderick Spode, whose group, the Saviours of Britain, are called the Black Shorts.
Why shorts?
Because by the time Spode started ordering uniforms for his followers, there were no more colours of shirts left.
And so the eugenic test of a true-born Englishman is his knees. Roderick Spode calls for compulsory measurement of the knees.
Not for the true-born Englishman, the bony angularity of the so-called intellectual, not for him the puffy knee of the criminal classes. The British knee is firm, the British knee is muscular, the British knee is on the march.
In Britain, you could joke, but in Germany, eugenics was deadly serious.
In the new Great Germany, there would be no place for those deemed racially, socially, or physically defective. This was called racial hygiene.
Gay men were amongst the first to be targeted. Leader of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, proclaimed,
Homosexuality is a symptom of racial degeneracy destructive to our race. We have returned to the guiding Nordic principle that degenerates should be exterminated.
thousands were sent to concentration camps like Dachau, where most of them died.
More than 300,000 women who were considered defective were forcibly sterilized.
For Nordics or Aryans with blonde hair and blue eyes had to breed, to have lots of children to expand the Aryan race.
But this was not enough for Hitler.
He planned a program of involuntary euthanasia of defective people.
Who they called lives unworthy of life.
In July 1939, it was agreed to establish a register of all people with mental illness and physical deformity.
Hitler's program of involuntary euthanasia got underway.
The first people to be killed were defective children.
The first little boy was killed in July 1939.
His name was Gerhard Kretschmann.
He was born blind and physically handicapped.
He was 5 months old.
Secret killing of babies and children followed. Midwives had to report births of disabled babies who were taken away.
Their parents were told they were being taken to special treatment centres, but they were not seen again.
After a couple of weeks, they were killed by lethal injection or poison gas.
The net widened to include older children, including adolescents deemed to be juvenile delinquents.
The Nazis saw a threat to the survival of the Aryan race. It could be averted only by the colonization of Eastern Europe.
Slavic people, labelled racially inferior, would be allowed to live, but only as slaves to supply Germany with free labour.
What about other groups, like the Gypsies?
Oh no, the Roma were not considered Aryans.
And Jews? What about the Jews?
Anti-Semitism was not confined to Germany, as James Joyce shows in his novel Ulysses. Mr. Deasy speaks to Stephen Dedalus.
Mark my words, Mr. Davis, England is in the hands of the Jews, in all the highest places, her finances, her press, and they are the signs of a nation's decay. Wherever they gather, they eat up the nation's vital strength. As sure as we are standing here, the Jew merchants are already at their work of destruction. Old England is dying.
A merchant, Stephen said, is one who buys cheap and sells dear. Jew or Gentile, is it not?
But the Nazis saw themselves in a world historical struggle against Judeo-Bolshevism.
Don't you mean Judeo-capitalism?
In 1935, the Nazis passed the Nuremberg laws, making Jews second-class citizens.
They could no longer work in the civil service or academic positions or practice law
Or practice as doctors on non-Jewish patients, or own businesses.
or marry Aryans,
They were encouraged to immigrate.
but they couldn't take their money.
In 1934, Anne Frank and her family moved from Frankfurt to Amsterdam, believing they would be safe there.
Despite all this, the Olympic Games were hosted in Berlin in 1936.
Signs saying that Jews were unwanted were temporarily removed.
Some gay bars were allowed to reopen, and the police were told not to bother visiting foreign homosexuals.
To Hitler's dismay, German athletes were beaten in many events. To his horror, African-American athlete Jesse Owens took 4 gold medals.
Owen's fans included thousands of young German women shouting, "Who is Jesse? Who is Jesse?"
Hitler refused to shake the hands of any of the winners who were not German. Nevertheless, the 1936 Berlin Olympics were a huge public relations success for the Nazis.
As Archie Williams, African-American gold medalist in the 400 meters, said in an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle,
When I came home, somebody asked me, "How did those dirty Nazis treat you?" I replied that I didn't see any dirty Nazis, just a lot of nice German people, and I didn't have to ride at the back of the bus.
but after the games, the persecution of the Jews and the gays started up again.
In November 1938, on Kristallnacht, Nazi thugs smashed up thousands of Jewish businesses and hundreds of synagogues,
They attacked and beat up Jews in the street.
and then arrested 30,000 Jewish men and sent them to concentration camps.
The Times of London observed, no foreign propagandist bent upon blackening Germany before the world could outdo the tale of burnings and beatings, of blackguardly assaults on defenceless and innocent people which disgraced that country yesterday.
In his poem, 1938, German pastor Niemeyer wrote,
First they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew.
then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist.
Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a trade unionist.
Then they came for me. There was no one left to speak for me.
Refugees flooded out of Germany.
No country wanted to accept too many refugees.
Switzerland accepted 30,000 and then closed its borders.
The British agreed to accept child refugees.
10,000 children were admitted to Britain in the famous Kinder Transport.
1939, W.H. Auden wrote, Refugee Blues.
Say this city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes.
Yet there's no place for us, my dear. Yet there's no place for us.
Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there.
We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now.
The consul banged the table and said,
If you've got no passport, you're officially dead.
but we are still alive, my dear, but we are still alive.
Came to a public meeting. The speaker got up and said,
If we let them in, they will steal our daily bread.
he was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me.
Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky.
It was Hitler over Europe saying,
They must die.
oh, we were in his mind, my dear. Oh, we were in his mind.
Saw a poodle in a jacket fastened with a pin. Saw a door open and a cat let in.
But they weren't German Jews, my dear. But they weren't German Jews.
Stood on a great plain in the falling snow,
10,000 soldiers marched to and fro,
looking for you and me, my dear.
looking for you and me. In March 1939, Hitler tore up the Munich Agreement and invaded Czechoslovakia. On the 1st of September, the German army marched into Poland. Britain and France finally declared war on Germany.
And W.H. Auden wrote, September the 1st, 1939.
Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth.
The unmentionable odour of death offends this September night.
I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return.
All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. We must love one another or die. Anybody has any questions? We're very happy. Your blessing.
Yes.
I don't know if you can feel. You know, I think it was really good. It's a very brave solving book. It's a way to. Hospitalized sometimes could have been a conscious condition. Do you think that might make a really bearing on the way in which he responded to life and to the particular side?
Yeah, well, I hesitate to go to the psychology of Hitler, but everything that happens to one is going to affect us, and we're going to react in different ways. I'm not involved in the Second World War, and they knew in 1939 something terrible was happening. They didn't know how bad it was. My opinion is that they are facing civil war. So they knew it, and he saw it in an army, he saw it. Therefore, it was in Civil War. They knew, trying to think about it. We don't know who's more dangerous, Trump or Putin. Well, yes, it's a garden. I think people all over the place, yes. We hope that you'll be able tomorrow to give a signal.
Aye.
Period. That is, as much as been labelled a long time. I mean, you've got Pitt, you've got song, that space to music and dance, pretty much. All about enjoying yourself for like before the war. But this is very much a class issue, isn't it? My foster father, the man who brought me out, would walk to 20 miles during the 30s to actually subsidy horses and walk back to his family. Meanwhile, as you said, high society was having a very great time. I just think there's a misnomer within the perspective of the 30s. It's very, very good for some people. And I think some of the texts that you quoted show that.
Right, yes, I mean, we tried to kind of show a little bit of across the range and, you know, and those who were kind of making progress and when, you know, and things were getting better for them. And then historical things like the Depression so much kind of turned it around. For everybody. No, not at all, no. Yeah, the next part.